then I will call the panelists, and then I ask. Good morning, everyone. We will get the event underway. I invite you, if you don't have headsets, to get one so that you can hear the commentary and the conversation from all the panelists. My name is Marc Godin. I am with PTAC, the Petroleum Technology Alliance Canada, and I'm so thrilled to have a panel today of strong leaders from Alberta on this topic of climate and emissions reduction. So I will be joined through this panel by Minister Rebecca Schultz, Justin Reamer of Emissions Reduction Alberta, Kendall Dilling of Pathways Alliance, and John Adams of the Natural Gas Innovation Fund. I have a few words of introduction. I have 4 or 5 slides to set the stage, and then I'll invite the panelists to join me up front. Each of them will have a few words of opening remarks to say more about themselves, their organization, and their accomplishments. And then we will have some questions and answers in the last 25 minutes of this event. And we will be inviting questions from the audience as we will have time. So we want to speak about the topic of this COP29. So this is a chart. I have a few charts. They're from the International Energy Agency and ExxonMobil. So this is the track record of the use of fossil fuel, coal, oil, natural gas through the last decades, and it's fairly flat utilization. And when we talk about emissions, where do they come from? This chart shows on the vertical axis is the economic size of the country, and the size of the circle are the emissions from that country. And the top, of course, is the United States. Canada is not on the chart, too small for the IEA to notice us, but that gives you an idea where they come from, and in the future, developing countries will have most of the emissions. If we look at the type of fuels that will provide energy in the future, we see the various important fuels, oil being fairly flat as forecasted. Natural gas is still a growth fuel, mostly on replacing coal, and you see that black line of coal falling quite steeply over the decade to 2050, and the renewables showing steady growth as well as nuclear. And what does that mean? As we change, we still need more energy, but as we change the energy mix, we forecast emissions to gradually go down and peaking in this decade. But the key message, of course, is this blue graphic here is the expectation based on traditional forecasting method. The yellow graphic is inserting all the promises that have been done through the COPs, including this is up to COP 28. And the green one is what needs to happen if we were to reach net zero by 2050. So there's still a lot to be done to get to those outcomes. And we want to segue to Canada. These are the Canadian emissions, fairly flat, slowly declining. But what we're proud to talk about is on an intensity basis. This is by units of economic activity. They have been steeply declining and forecast to continue to decline. And here we see while emissions have declined 7%, they've declined 39 or 26% per capita or by unit of economic activity. So what we have here is, oops, it's scrolling fast, but this is because of the accomplishment that we want to talk about this morning. In Alberta, a lot of investment have been made on new technologies, new policies, and they have deliver results. So, and those results, we'll be talking about them today. So I'd like to invite my panelists, Minister Schultz, Kendall Dilling, Justin Reamer, and John Adams to join me here in the podium. And I know just at this COP29, the government of Alberta announced that as of 2023, for example, methane emissions, which is a big contributor to those emissions, have been reduced by 52% in the province. So that's an outstanding accomplishment as a result of many efforts around policy, technology, and regulations. So I'd like to invite Minister Schultz to offer a few words of introduction.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. It's great to see everybody here this morning. Alberta does have an exceptional story to tell and a role to play when it comes to meeting global energy demand for safe, affordable, reliable energy, but of course, reducing emissions as well. Our approach has been to work with industry, provide some flexibility, and work with industry on solutions to meet all of our goals, whether that be for energy production, of course, or for the environment. We've led the way on decreasing emissions without, as I said, cutting production and making sure that we continue to grow jobs and grow our economy, which matters to the people that we serve. We, of course, are showing the world that it is possible to lower emissions and continue to focus on economic growth at the same time. So thanks for the opportunity to be here this morning.
Thank you, Minister. Awesome. I'll turn it over to Justin. Sorry. Yeah, Justin. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Pleasure to be here with Minister Schultz and to see all of you here again. Most of you here have heard the ERA story several times. I want to go over too much of what we've gone over earlier. One of the things we haven't emphasized as much here, which is also a great story, is over the 15 years that we've been investing over $1 billion now, we expect to see 32 million megatons of emissions reduced by 2030 and 100 million megatons by 2050. So some demonstrable results in terms of emission reductions through the late stage technology funding that we've provided. And what we're seeing is an effective approach, not only here, but in other jurisdictions, is the emphasis on a portfolio approach of technologies. There's not one single silver bullet that's going to get us to where we need to be. We need to be trying in a variety of different areas. And we're very excited to see, the focus that we've had within the province on things such as hydrogen, CCS, and a lot of focus on energy efficiency. We're seeing ramped up interest in energy efficiency, but we're also seeing a demonstrable increase in investments in the circular economy within the province, focus on recycling, utilization of waste into other products and resources. We announced earlier this week the advanced materials call, so we're very excited to see more projects in that domain come forward into the next little while. But the ecosystem that we've been working with and with PTAC has been a great set of successes that we've established in Alberta, working in partnership with industry to get companies across the final mile to implement these technologies. And we're proud to be part of that solution.
Thank you, Justin. Over to you, Kendall, for a few words of introduction.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Corinne, for hosting as always. Pleasure to be here. My name is Kendall Dilling, president of the Pathways Alliance. So we represent the oil sands industry, at least the 6 largest oil sands producers, accounting for somewhere close to 98% of oil sands production. Pathways was created to further collective ambition, especially when common and shared infrastructure is required. This is a huge challenge, obviously, and too big for any one company to solve on their own. So Pathways is unique in that it's an entire sector effectively that's come together to work collaboratively on solutions across air, land, water, and a whole bunch of areas, but with a particular focus certainly on greenhouse gas emissions. And we have a flagship carbon capture and storage project that we're advancing. We're well through engineering and regulatory and consultation and all the good things you need to do to develop these mega projects. It's on the order of a $16 billion undertaking, so certainly not for the faint of heart. We continue to work with stakeholders and governments on the right formula to allow these kind of projects to FID and move forward. And so I spend my time and days thinking about that. And we'll talk about that a bit more through the panel, but how do we create the environment that allows these kinds of critical projects, these critical decarbonization projects to proceed?
Thank you, Kendall. And over to you, John Adams from NGIF.
Testing working good. So good morning. I think I know everyone in the room here, and I think we're going to each test each other on our companies after COP because we've learned a lot from each other on these panels. So as first of all, thank you, Mark and PTAC and Minister Schultz and Corinne for these are great sessions we're having over the last couple of days. NGIF stands for the Natural Gas Innovation Fund, so our focus is on natural gas. And at NGIF, we build companies to increase the economic and environmental performance of our Alberta and Canadian natural gas sector. So how does NGIF do that? We build companies, we build clean tech companies through 2 different mechanisms that I run. I run a nonprofit called NGIF Accelerator. That NGIF Accelerator provides non-dilutive grants pooled from 14 energy companies. So it's completely industry driven. We have a competitive process. We look at hundreds and hundreds of solutions from clean tech companies, Alberta, Canada, in fact, even across the world. And we bring those companies and we embed them in pilots, mostly across Alberta. And we de-risk those companies through a project that essentially is testing their solution inside the backyard of one of our 14 energy companies. So the product market fit piece is quite important. So we do those on a pre-commercial side of things. We've got, and the work there is in all aspects of clean tech. We have clean tech from hydrogen, carbon capture, energy efficiency, methane, and any type of solution that will essentially produce or distribute cleaner natural gas. We also have in our nonprofit accelerator our recently expanded NGIF ETC program that is specifically around methane. And essentially, we have, rather than in the grants program, we have pilots all across Alberta and across Canada in our ETC program at one single location at the Tourmaline Perpetual West Wolf Lake plant. We have about 65 methane technology companies in one single hub, all together across the system. And there we are testing them simultaneously and learning lots of important pieces around what methane technology works better in what environment. And so that's been running quite well. And we just recently had some additional funding from Minister Schultz and AEP on. But that isn't enough from a pre-commercial perspective. So then now companies need to grow and scale. And so NGIF also has, I run a for-profit venture fund, NGIF Capital. And there we have a venture capital fund, and that fund scales these companies so that they can go into the natural gas sector and do the great things that they're supposed to do. So thank you very much.
Awesome, John. And I love this panel because we're talking big numbers, 100 million tons and $16 billion and reducing emissions and growing production at the same time. So moving the needle. But I have some questions for you. We'll start with Minister Schultz. As Canada advances towards carbon neutrality, how do you see the newly announced federal emissions cap impacting the country's ability to contribute to global energy demand while at the same time reducing emission?
Well, there's a few smiles out there in the crowd because there's, I think, a few people who know what my feelings are on the federal government's oil and gas emissions cap, which I call a cap on production and prosperity. See, I had one of those cappuccinos from Australia, so now I'm ready to go. I think obviously, like this is not the best way. I don't believe to reach our goals. I think it ignores the very practical realities of Albertans and Canadians when it comes to safe, affordable, reliable energy. I think it ignores, again, that affordability is a top of mind concern. I think it ignores the fact that we can't live without oil and gas. We absolutely can't. And while I think our industry cares about obviously doing the right thing for the environment, I think when you look at global demand and who around the world is looking for energy security as well, I also believe that our industry has an obligation to step up and meet those demands. I think we're happy to. And so we've taken a different approach, as I mentioned. Our approach is not to just hit a hard target for industry to then follow, but instead to work with industry to say, okay, what can we do? What should we do? What is this going to look like? What policies can help encourage us doing the right thing when it comes to our environmental goals? But how do we also see production continue to increase? And I do think that that approach has been working. It's great to see that we've been able to increase production while reducing emissions. I think that that's a win. And so I would definitely wholeheartedly say that we're opposing that cap. Some of you know that already. And so here's hoping that there is either, a federal government now or into the future that's willing to listen to those concerns and work with us as well.
So Alberta thinks you can do both at the same time,
Well, and it's
increase production, supply energy, and reduce emissions as you've proven by 52% in methane.
yeah, it's not just that we believe it, it's that we've shown it, that we've been able to demonstrate that. And I think methane is the best example where, 1 year ago, we were able to say that we hit our 45% methane emissions reduction target. Now we are at 52%, and that continues to decline every single day. We were able to do that in a way that was far more economically advantageous for industry than if we had followed the hard cap approach of the federal government. $600 million is that number in terms of what our approach had ultimately saved industry in terms of dollars, but then still being able to meet our target ahead of schedule. And so I think it speaks to the relationship I think that we have when it comes to industry. I think especially on the methane side, our partners in industry, companies like Tourmaline and Perpetual, and when John is talking about all of the great work happening there, industry was looking at this far before any government ever said we're going to set a target. And I think that that's really the success story of Alberta.
Awesome, thank you. And Kendall, so $16 billion. So what's the business case for this?
Excellent question. And my pleasure. So I'm going to frame this up a little bit before I jump right in and answer that question, Mark. It's been interesting being at COP this week. And one of the themes that is coming very clear to me is this sort of tension between, ambition and we're just going to set these targets and make it happen versus kind of the pragmatic reality on the ground of physics and economics and how you actually do it. And I think we need to just celebrate progress in all forms. And I think Alberta's an awesome showcase of real tangible progress that's making a difference. If you think about Canada writ large and even Alberta, most of the success we've had to date, and this is probably true globally actually, bending the emissions curve has been getting off coal and switching to gas for electricity generation. That's been globally and certainly within the Canadian context, a huge needle mover. Now, that came at some cost for sure, but given the nature of that industry, by and large, those costs can be flowed through to the consumer. And so there was an economic basis there for those investments to be made, and there was readily available technology to make that switch. And so that has largely occurred. And yes, all of us, industrials and residential consumers, now pay commensurately more for electricity, but probably we would say on balance, given the size of the prize, that was probably a reasonable trade-off to make. You look at the methane example that the minister just talked about, methane also has an underlying business case in that methane has value, and if you can conserve it and sell it versus letting it vent or flare, of course, there's economics in that. And so in any sector, when you start doing this work, there's low-hanging fruit that you take first. And I think the industry did a brilliant job of taking that low-hanging fruit. And then governments, through some very good policy, said, okay, let's just turn that knob a little further. And they created some incentives using tier funds and offset protocols. So companies would then take that next step into the slightly uneconomic stuff. And the next frontier is to go even deeper. And we'll do that. And that continual progress is really what you want to see. Now the province, we're talking about carbon capture and storage. And even in that context, the ones that are going first are those where there's an underlying economic business case. So you look at the Dow and liquid products projects and
Absolutely.
The capital region that we, are very hopeful will proceed. They get a premium on a low carbon product. So again, there's some inherent economics in doing that. And so that's awesome. And seeing those proceed will be fantastic. As you move down that value chain, though, to the pure just capture and storage, it becomes a lot trickier because there isn't that underlying business case. And there's, at this point, no premium on the product to create a lower carbon product. We certainly hope there will be one day. You can regulate it, right? You can put a cost on those emissions, as has been done in Alberta since decade plus, and that starts to create incentives for industry to make those investments. But there's a natural ceiling on that because we are, as most of Canada's industries, emissions intensive, trade exposed sectors, right? And so when we sell into international commodity markets, there's a limit to how much cost burden you can put on those sectors until you make them uncompetitive. And so again, that's kind of the low-hanging fruit that over the last decade we've taken off the table in oil sands and reduced our emissions per barrel significantly over that period of time. But now the next frontier, and this is what a bunch of us are spending our time working on, is how do we get these pure and very expensive CCS projects to proceed? And there's lots of work going on that, and there's lots of creativity being brought to the table. But any way you slice it, it's expensive, and there's only so many pools of money to fund that work. And so again, another theme I'm hearing here at COP is how can we create some pull for those products? And over time, if there is a green premium for the product, that obviously shores up those economics. Enhanced oil recovery, I mean, that's again one of the reasons why ACTL went ahead in Alberta first early, because there was that underlying economics associated with EOR, while you're still getting the permanent sequestration of the tons. So I'm just walking you down that value chain.
It's a massive undertaking.
Yeah. And here we are now, and we're going to get it done, and we're working really, really hard on it. There's a number of projects that I believe will proceed in Alberta. The government, by the way, has done a really good job of seeding the field and creating fertile ground for this, right? They got way ahead on the pore space.
Oh, yes,
subsurface.
yes. The regulatory framework is there.
We've got the regulatory framework, the measurement, monitoring, verification protocols, all that is there and ready to go. And we're blessed with some of the best geology in the world for CO2 storage. So if anyone can do it, it's Alberta.
And the big difference with the other examples is you cannot increment, right? It's a big one or not.
You have to kind of do these at scale. But if you do, then you do a couple of things. Here's the business case. I finally gotten around to answering.
Okay.
One, you future-proof one of your core economic sectors for the province and the country, right? In terms of the oil sands and being able to continue to be relevant in a lower carbon future. To the investment itself, I mean, a $16 billion investment is massive in terms of employment and GDP impacts and all that comes with that kind of an investment. And then three, you create opportunities for diversification. And we're seeing that already, the petchem projects that were mentioned. I know green steel is knocking on Alberta's door. I know there's, blue hydrogen opportunities. So once you get that backbone of CCS infrastructure built, and that first inoculation is hard and expensive.
Yes.
Once you get that
It's
in,
foundational though.
it's foundational, and then a whole lot of good things can.
Awesome.
follow.
So Justin, 100 million tons. That's a big number. So you're leading that charge. How are you doing it? And you're moving on to circular economy. Is that going to add to it as well and do some more job creation?
Yeah, absolutely. So 100 million tons comes through a portfolio approach, and we've had a lot of success working with companies at that late stage of technology development who just need a little bit of technology funding to cross the line, to get the
Yes.
extra capital to deploy. And it's actually that capital is getting tighter now. I think it was a lot free flowing 2 years ago, maybe even a year ago. With interest rates increasing, with more risk-based analysis, where policy environments are changing, it's getting harder for these innovators to access that additional private sector capital to implement clean technologies. So we need to do more than just provide funding. We need to make sure our policy and regulatory regimes are certain and clear for our companies. And thankfully, we have such a fantastic environment in Alberta to do so. There's varying degrees of certainty when you go to the national level or international level that causes concern. One of the things I wanted to build on what Kendall said is we do have a pretty strong functioning ecosystem here for technology development here in Canada, particularly in Alberta. And the federal government put in this Canada Growth Fund concept for contract for differences. And I know Kendall's in deep discussions with the federal government on that to secure that. There's been 4 contract for differences awarded to Alberta companies in the province to date.
Yes.
Varme, which is municipal waste to energy. We have Ever geothermal. We've talked about quite some time. Strathcona Resource, which is a smaller CCS project for oil sands. There's one more that's escaping me right now, but
Deep Sky.
Entropy, right?
Entropy,
right.
yes.
What's interesting about those is ERA was the first money in on all of those projects. So we helped the companies through the feasibility stage to get to the point where
Congratulations, that's awesome.
a market and a business case decision that Canada Growth Fund then felt comfortable to providing that additional contract for difference clarity. But what you're noticing with those projects is they're all sub $1 billion. And so they're easier to get your mind around from a financial element. Kendall's project is a lot more challenging, a lot larger dollar figures, and with a lot more additional complexity. So, but this is how any big innovation goes. You get the small, more incremental, easier ones done first. You demonstrate that success, and then that leads to more transformative outcomes into the future. I would say the trajectory and the thought process we had on hydrogen a couple of years ago is a lot different now than it was projected to be a couple of years ago. It's way harder than people thought. It's more expensive than people thought. It's not as easier to deploy in certain instances than was thought. But that's the point of innovation, is trying by doing. And often you don't know when you have an engineer write up a schematic on a piece of paper, and then you actually go and try and construct it and deploy it and demonstrate it. Your findings are much more significant. So the value Alberta has is we're willing to try all of these different things. We're willing to fund all of these different things. Not all of them are going to succeed. Some will have incremental improvements. Some will have more transformational improvements. But the point is we're trying and we're learning and doing and sharing those learnings.
Well, the other point is we're delivering.
And we're delivering.
Delivering, yes. So John, ecosystem, we're just leading to that, right? So the policy environment, the big dollars and the investment in de-risking, you bring it all home, right?
It's always the being at the end. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm always at the end. So first of all, this is really big money, and this is big money, and I'm not as in the same kind of numbers as
It's
you
your
guys.
important money, John.
But I will say a couple of things. First of all, we are industry backed, and so I have an accountability to industry to basically do build companies and create results and for emissions and in Alberta. So so there's some work NGF does really well, and then there's some work that I need help with. And so we do is we find companies and we fund companies, or we provide some investment to companies that have come through a due diligence process. And I know we all have due diligence processes. And so we get them some money, and we get them now validated. And we find again, I always come down to product market fit. Is this something that industry is going to take, bring into their assets and use them? Is this something that that can be repeated over and over and over again, meaning commercial order, commercial order. Every commercial order is a new emissions reduction. So you need to have that multiplier. And I wouldn't be in business if I don't create a result every single time. But that's a lot of pressure. And so what we do is I go to my colleague Justin here and I say, Justin, for example, maybe we can collaborate on something in the ecosystem to drive some performance in my sector where we have a common mandate. And we did that once before. Emissions Reduction Alberta, ERA, had a natural gas funding call. That natural gas funding call had a call out to industry and to startups to come forward with solutions to essentially lower emissions in the gas sector. And so that happened, and we talked about that, and then our organization got involved. And so after that call and the competition, we have a trusted partner relationship, and that trusted partner relationship, we've got some paperwork in place, and then we can share some due diligence, and we can share some notes on companies, which is fantastic if there's a startup in the room here, because they're going to tell you, wow, that means I don't have to go twice to two different organizations and tell the story two different times. And so it worked. And so we jumped in sort of halfway through one of their stages and vice versa. And I think it was 10 companies that came out of that process, and that were funded jointly by NGIF and ERA. And so what that did was it created a result where they had some good results because they had some industry validation. We had some good results because we had some emissions reduction validation. And lo and behold, we've now got companies out in the market doing really good things. We can cite lots of them, Kuva's doing it and Cube's doing it. And we have a lot of examples where these companies are now pushing forward. And then sometimes when we have companies that are partway through a project, for example, in COVID, there was a bit of a crisis. People didn't have any money. And so we went to CRIN, and CRIN said, you know what, John, I've got a little bit of money that didn't get used from our last competition. And I said, well, I've got some projects that need some funding gaps. And so we again came together and shared notes, and CRIN leveraged our due diligence. And so now some money that was needed desperately by some of these startups who, for no fault of their own, came through a COVID condition, and then we got them some money, and the company continued and continued forward. So my message here, and it's a message that I see a lot that Alberta is doing, and I don't see very much else, and I hope people will model it, and that is we share, we're doing it together. It's you said it yesterday, it's a bit of a village approach, but I can't do it on my own, and I don't think any of us can. And I've gone to PTAC, and PTAC and NGF have collaborated, and who am I missing? Alberta Innovates. I just saw Brian here somewhere. We've done some work with them too.
Absolutely, Brian. Yeah.
So
But the ecosystem's working.
The ecosystem's working, and I think it's just the beginning. We're really proud to be able to say we're not going to work in a silo, and we're here together, and we continue to do that.
So
and the final piece is you can't do it alone. And so then government comes and helps out. And so we know we've got government, we've got industry, we've got all the partners, and that's why we're doing so well in Alberta.
Perfect. So Minister Schultz, we talked about methane, 52%, great achievement. What about carbon capture? So the achieving large scale reduction in sectors like the oil sand, like Kendall's project and others, requires strong policy support. And what does that look like? Policy measures, regulatory framework for carbon capture.
Well, and I think Kendall already spoke to some of that. Our government's approach really was to set up the right environment where industry feels that they can thrive in these areas. And so when we look at CCUS, this is something that, especially at COP last year, What was so amazing to me is just our leadership in this area and how far we are ahead of other jurisdictions. And part of that is because of the regulatory structure in place and the certainty that that gives our industry. That I would say, certainly we were hearing from other companies in other countries that they are not in that position to move as quickly as we are because they don't have those pieces in place. And so when we look at how far we've come in CCUS, we have 14 million tons of CO2 already stored underground through Alberta Carbon Trunk Line and Shell Quest, which is pretty exciting.
It's awesome.
Seeing a number of other projects moving forward in a variety of industries, I would say is pretty cool. And so we'll continue to champion that. I mean, our approach has really been to be less about being prescriptive on what technology we want to see, but essentially making it a place, Alberta, a place that all of our industries want to innovate and grow and move
So you
forward.
eliminate the uncertainty and the regulations are there. Industry can invest and with confidence.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so aside from the tax incentives, obviously, or competitiveness, I would say, as well as the regulatory piece, rolling out the Alberta Carbon Capture Incentive Program last year, moving very quickly, again, working with industry to say, is this going to work? You know, how do we make this policy work for the types of projects that industry wants to bring forward? And so we worked really quickly on that after the last election to get that in place. And so I think it's a combination, but then of course also our tier system has been very helpful in creating some certainty
And a
and benefit.
competitive jurisdiction
Absolutely.
globally. Yeah, yeah. And Kendall, so we touch on these subjects about reducing emissions and maintaining or growing the economy at the same time. We've done that. Can we still continue that in the future as we keep reducing emissions?
So as I said in my earlier comments, there's always low hanging fruit when you start down this path.
Yeah, beyond those, right? So
Yeah. So we've kind of taken most of those out of the system, frankly.
yeah.
Because Albertans get stuff done.
Yeah.
We've done that stuff, and there's a lot of countries that haven't even done that. We're getting now into that harder spot. It's a near-term, long-term thing for me, Mark. In the near term, some of these things won't be economic, and they're going to be costs, and we've got to be really clever about how we do that, because this is all being done with the backdrop of an affordability crisis in the province and in the country, right? And so there's only so much that people are willing to bear in the system. And so we've got to get really clever about how we do this. But if we can, as I said, figure out strategically where those key strategic advantages for the province and the industry, inoculate those, get those going, maintain our early leadership position. Over time, those will become economic value propositions. But it takes a bit of vision to get establish the foundation.
Yeah. And Justin, like you're kind of the cool technology organization.
Not cool.
Not cool?
That's pretty hot, but
Pretty hot. Okay. Well, I hear you got some advanced materials projects, circular economy projects, and even brewery projects.
yes, you want to hear about the brewery.
I want to hear
Everyone
about the brewery. Yes.
project.
Yes.
So carbon capture comes in various forms, and we focus a lot on the oil sands because of the emissions intensity there. But the province has done a masterful job in seeing the implementation of some very significant CCS projects across the waterfront. And we talk about Shell Quest. We talk about the new 2 projects that Shell has FID'd in terms of CCS as well. Very exciting. We've got the cement coming. We hopefully will see Heidelberg announce its FID in the near future as well. And we have other sectors looking at it, but it's also being done on a small scale. It's being done on conventional gas plays through Entropy. We were just up visiting there a little while ago, and amazing to see the amount of resource and ingenuity that's being done to do CCS on site on industrial places rather than having to ship the CO2 too far away right under the pore space. But one of the very interesting and relatively inexpensive processes that we helped to demonstrate and fund was the capture of CO2 off of craft beer manufacturing, and Lineman Brewing, who many of you have probably enjoyed at some point in your history, is now a net zero craft beer. We helped them put in a process that allows them to capture the CO2. They then use that CO2 to clean their vessels. Craft beer manufacturing is just all about cleanliness and making sure the vessels are clean, and they re-inject some of the CO2 in for carbonation as well. And we're seeing they were the first in Canada to do this, and so we're seeing other interest from other partners as well. So yeah, there's a variety of different applications, both small and large. And one of the great things at ERA, when we're working with the ecosystem, with Innovates, with NGIF and others, is we get to support both smaller innovators, the SMEs, as well as the large industrials. And often the magic happens when you bridge the two. You see a smaller innovator with an amazing innovation that has solved the need for a larger industrial firm. And we're seeing more and more of those kinds of applications making demonstrable progress in terms of the emission reduction.
So did ERA taste the beer?
Sure did.
And does it taste
Yeah.
better?
Yes, it does.
It does.
It does.
Okay, very good.
Cleaner for some reason.
So John, you talked about all the financial side and starting companies, but there's a lot of technical work and demonstration and needs to be done in the field. And you've led the way with the emissions testing center. And could you touch on it already, but maybe you can elaborate on that big investment.
Sure. So Minister Schultz alluded to it earlier, which was that industry a long time ago saw the need to innovate and do something to continuously improve the performance of emissions. And so, and where's is Brian? Brian. So I'm looking at Brian because pre-COVID, uh, uh, Alberta Innovates and Enercan actually.
So that's Brian Helfenbaum,
Right,
Vice
sorry,
President of.
VP of Alberta Innovates, and so I look at him because there's a story here because I like to tell stories. So there was a call for a methane network, and of course, Mark, you know this well from PTAC, and the call was to come together and figure out how to put a network together to reduce methane emissions, and so. We, meaning Tourmaline and University of Calgary and ourselves, thought, okay, so maybe the approach could be a center, a network of places, which is good. And I know there's another network that came out of that from that call, but we went in front of Brian and said, how about this? How about we actually centralize and bring everything under sort of one roof and see how we can enjoy the merits of that knowledge to increase emissions in Alberta. And so thus became the concept of the NGIF ETC, which brought in consortium partners. Tourmaline and Perpetual together own a plant, and Tourmaline, is Mark Scott here? Tourmaline, there he is. I think you're going to hear Scott later on all the tech.
Yes.
Don't
Don't steal his thunder.
I won't. I'm just going to talk about the innovation of the thinking. And so then there was University of Calgary as well.
And Ian Gates was here yesterday.
Ian Gates was here yesterday. So essentially, though, the innovation for anyone who hasn't heard the story yet is that we came together and said, let's find a way to test and validate methane, specifically methane technology companies, so that they can get situated well, get some calibration from an actual field test and from a lab test, and essentially make the particular startup or founder or innovator a little more calibrated and validated, which is really important. It's so much more expensive 5 years down the line to change something on your technology when if you just figured it out in the beginning, it's a quick fix versus $1 million fix 5 years from now. And so Scott and his team at Tourmaline do a tremendous amount of work in doing just that. Scott, you're going to not like you might fix the number, but I think it's 60 or so, 60
Yeah,
or
we want numbers. Like, is it
60
small or
or
just big?
It's big. 60. So imagine at a single gas plant system.
Yeah.
That's a big undertaking. And so, and if Ian was here, he would tell you there's a lot of them that come through his lab first. And so essentially the startup goes to the lab, gets situated, simulation testing, then goes up to the test site at the West Wolf Lake plant, spends anywhere from a month to 2 years there. And then out of that, they come out in a much better situation. So Mark, to answer your question, validation is a critical part of the success of a startup story. And in the case of methane, the 2.0 version, the next, not the low hanging fruit that Kendall talked about, but the next generation, the actually the hard to reach methane, if we could call it that, will come from these technology companies that we're looking at through ETC and GWC.
Thank you, John. So, Minister Schultz, so looking at the future, are we looking at doing more of the same, or are we having some new policies in the works? And how do you see the future developing for all of what we talked about, the innovation ecosystem, reducing emissions, CCUS, hydrogen?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think our premier says it best, that it's not about one industry. We want to, of course, continue to be leaders when it comes to energy, but also we want to see all of these new technologies find a place to grow and thrive in Alberta. I think she believes that we can do all of these things and continue to be leaders in all of these areas. And I think, again, it comes down to our commitment in terms of working with industry to say, are the right policies in place? I mean, we think we've got a pretty great start. We've got a competitive tax advantage. We're looking to reduce red tape in every area of government. But I think that that's what you're starting to see when it comes to the investments that we've got going on. We've got the Hydrogen Center of Excellence. We've got a number of projects moving forward in that area. We're working on SMRs and nuclear as well. Again, more CCS. We have geothermal starting to move forward. We just launched some dollars to spur on the work of the drilling accelerator, which is also pretty exciting, looking at how we can expand that renewable baseload energy in the province of Alberta, which I think also has some potential. Of course, we've seen a huge amount of renewables. We've got to address some of those issues around reliability and reclamation, but we're pretty excited about where the future
And it
is
creates
headed.
jobs
It
and good
creates
jobs.
jobs. And again, affordability also matters. And so we have to move forward in a way that makes sense. And I think, and I think somebody just mentioned that there has definitely been a shift from last year to this year at COP around practicality. And so we always say that we're going to move forward as fast as technology and economics allow. We've got to be practical, but we still want to be bold and creative.
Absolutely. Awesome. And Kendall, how do you see the future coming? That your carbon capture or other aspects to advance the oil and oil sands industry? It's the reserves are enormous, right? So it's how do we get those to market?
So my response will be a little colored by my week here at COP. An interesting experience to say the least. I fear that we've got a lot of really smart, really passionate, really caring people in boardrooms, on whiteboards, mapping out these ideal pathways to decarbonization that have never built a project in their lives, or who have never actually worked in an innovation ecosystem and understand how iterative and how challenging that process is. And I agree with the minister. There has been there, and it's as you see countries, starting to reiterate their national targets in advance of Brazil next year. They haven't made the progress they'd hoped to, but they just keep doubling and tripling down. And it's almost becoming laughable, right? I mean, UK just announced 81% by 2035, and that's indicative of all where these national targets now are coming out at. And I think at some point, actually, people are saying, okay, like, stop the insanity. Like, what practically can we do and just make progress? And that's what we're going to do in Alberta. That's what the future.
So the methane story of 52% is an achievement that's real. Yeah.
Brilliant. Like, I think that's such a good analog for what we need to do across a whole bunch of sectors. And as we get out there and we fail fast and we iterate, we'll learn, and we'll deploy technology, and we'll do it better every time. The thinking that I worry about is the thinking that says, unless it's a 100% full solution, it's no good. So we face a lot of opposition to CCS, because even though our project's going to reduce, on the order of 12 million tons a year of emissions, it reduces 100% of emissions. And so people get concerned about that. The same line of thinking says, blue hydrogen's no good because
Oh,
it's
yeah,
got to
yeah.
be
It's
green.
not pure enough.
And
Yeah.
nuclear is no good, by the way, because it's products that you've got to carefully manage and doing thing.
Yeah, switch microphones. I think yours running about the battery.
Thank you, Justin. So I'll just conclude by saying, I think we all have a bias to action in this room. I agree, let's be bold, but mostly let's just do stuff. Let's just get the, and again, the methane thing coming back to that is such a good example, right? Just get out there, get doing it, get learning, get innovating, and we'll do that across all the kind of major industrial sectors. That's what the future looks like.
And about doing, Justin, you just announced a new investment. And does ERA going to keep going and investing?
You bet. We're gonna continue to invest in the waterfront of opportunities that make sense. And I would just build on Kendall's comments, which I completely agree with. I think it's funny, you know, I think Alberta is a beacon of credibility in the area of emissions reduction, and we wouldn't get recognized for that if you watched media and sort of the commentary across the country. But we actually are a beacon of credibility because we've actually tackled and seen real emission reductions through these technology investments, in part through ER funding, through our ecosystem funding, but the ingenuity of the industry itself and the support and framework that the government's established. And I see for the future, ERA will continue to support these kinds of technologies, both the incremental and the transformative ones. And you will often see more emission reductions come from the incremental innovations than the transformative ones, because the
You have to do both,
you
right?
have to do both. But it's not doubling down and picking one solution. It's looking at the
Portfolio.
waterfront and learning from the marketplace, what the marketplace is saying, where the technology is going, where the policy environment is going, and making sure you're nimble enough to adapt and you're not stuck into these long structured plans. So I think
Yeah, and as the minister said, all the sectors matter, right?
all of the sectors
Hydrogen, CCUS, nuclear, and
yeah,
so on.
we're
right?
looking to do more in the future in agriculture and forestry, for instance.
Absolutely,
There's
yes.
real opportunities there.
And John, about actual credibility and demonstration, we talked about CO2 reductions. How about company creation? How many companies have you created that actually are now hiring people, exporting products?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a time to take a clean tech company to market. And so we've been around since 6 or 7 years, I suppose. So our companies are coming out the other end.
Yeah,
And
talk
they're
to the Cubes, the
Cubes and
Cuba.
Ionadas and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
these organizations. And so we have to continue to get them there. One of the things we're spending time on is now beyond Canada. We've got to get our companies out of Alberta, out of Canada, and then into the international markets. So
You mean selling?
selling their
not moving.
selling
Yeah.
commercial orders.
Yeah.
You need commercial orders from a clean tech company to generate emissions. So if you don't have that, then emissions aren't being reduced. So a big part of the work now we're looking at in the market adoption phase is not just locally, and of course we want to do that, but we have companies that can. Company needs to grow and prosper. It needs to become $100 million company.
Absolutely.
They're not going to do that just in Canada. We never
So
have
that's
enough.
how Canada or Alberta is helping the world, right? We
shape
do
them and
mature
then
these
they're gonna send
companies
them
and
off.
they sell and teach others.
But we're also bringing companies to Alberta.
Okay.
We've got Kuva is probably one of them, and there's a GHG Sat where we bring them to Alberta, and we've got, as we've noted many times, many energy companies who just love the idea.
That's a good story. I mean, I agree with you. Companies have moved to Alberta because of the competitive environment and this
you have customers here for them.
But the regulatory certainty, the tax competitiveness, and so on. So that there's true stories on that.
So there's the continuing to build the companies. It's you again, and now we get into that whole private equity and venture capital, and those organizations need to see that industry validated the company. They've got the sort of early years were supported by the ecosystem that we've talked about here. Then there's a whole other ecosystem.
Moving from grant funding
to capital funding.
Yes.
And that is equally important. And,
yes.
And you need that growth money to go into into markets. And without that, and again, the village continues. And so let's.
Perfect. We're coming to the end here. Minister, do you have any final comments or anybody here?
I think we've covered most of it.
Oh, we did.
It's
yeah.
just such a great opportunity to be here and be talking about all of the successes that we've seen. And I really just, Kendall, love what you said about being practical, because I think that's certainly what we've tried to do in Alberta.
Yes.
Saying it's not about setting unrealistic targets, because I think, in many cases, we're losing the public on that. When they see that these targets are unachievable, we'd rather just work with industry to say, how do we do things a little bit different, make a difference, and do things better, and make sure that we're still creating jobs and innovation and growing our economy. So I really appreciate all of you on the panel and the great work that you're doing on that front.
Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you, the audience, and just a word of clap of appreciation for our panelists.
And thank you, Mark.
Yeah.